All right, ladies and gentlemen, your request, the copy is being made. If it wasn't made, I apologize. But the water is being provided. Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before we stopped, we were talking about this school in Israel, but I don't think I asked you, what type of school was this? Was this a private prep school? What was the type of school?
Mr. Neuman described the school as not as you would typically think of a boarding school, like a nice place to go. He actually said that there were two different levels. The younger kids were kids that tended to be in what would be equivalent.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Counsel, why? I understand the question. Why is this response relevant to this case?
Your Honor, the type of school goes to the experience that he had there, to his reaction to it, to, I think it's important that the jury understand the type of school that he was at.
Well,
It may be that we need to approach.
yeah, let's rephrase that question. Come up, lawyers, come up.
Your Honor, I have withdrawn the state's objection.
All right, there's no objection. There's nothing in the rule on it. You may continue.
Can you tell the jury the type of school this was? Excuse me.
Sure. The school went from little kids, I believe like first grade or so, all the way through high school. And the younger level was mostly kids that were in some sort of like foster care system, kids who actually did not physically have homes to be at, and so they would be at this boarding school. And then the kids at the higher level, which was the high school level, which is the level that Mr. Neuman was at, those kids, some of them came from dysfunction in homes, some of them didn't, but the younger set of grades, most of those kids were from broken homes. It was like a foster care system is what he said, that particular part of the boarding school.
Okay, thank you. Now, were there other episodes after that first episode in the shack? Actually, still during his time in Israel, did he eventually end up with a family?
Objection, leading.
Sustained, she's on the record as asking non-leading questions, which means questions that do not suggest an answer. You may proceed.
You said that he was going home with other students and teachers for a period of time. Did that change?
It did. There came a point, I believe, that same year in which he learned, or he didn't learn, but family members learned that...
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
Hearsay.
Sustained. When she starts saying what family members, quote unquote, said, I was sustained that portion of the objection. She's more than willing to testify. She can, I should say, testify to whatever she recalls Mr. Newman told her, or she read what Mr. Newman read.
Okay. Are you just talking about what Mr. Newman told you? Is that what you're talking about here?
Yes, there came a point in which he was visited by some relatives that he did not know were in Israel. And these relatives came to basically be what he described as his surrogate parents. He actually described the woman as, her name was Nilly, and he described Nilly as being more of a mom to him than his biological mother had ever been. He described being loved and accepted by these people. They would take him home during the weekends in which there were holidays so that he would not have to stay at the boarding school by himself. And he continued that type of relationship with them where they kind of were his parenting figures, from what he said, throughout his years in boarding school. And he maintained relationship all the way until she passed away.
Now, that initial episode in the shack, were there other episodes after that of where he exhibited symptoms of bipolar disease?
There were. So
Let me stop you for a second. Did you prepare a chart that lays out a timeline with these episodes?
yes, I do. I have one.
Your Honor, I would ask to be allowed to use that chart.
You may. What number is this, Counsel? Just for record purposes.
Let me label it as Defense Exhibit 26.
I'm sorry. 26, all right.
Yes.
D26. Is there an objection? Is there an objection from the state to D26?
No, Your Honor.
All right. It's a modified objection. May publish it to the jury.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Well, Your Honor, this is for demonstrative purposes only.
All right. That's fine.
Looking at the chart, Doctor, when is the next time that he had an episode?
So the first mental illness episode was depression, and that was 13. The next one that he experienced, any type of mental illness, would have been a manic episode that he experienced in 1979. So a couple of years later, it was his last year in school. And the indication is that he was, at that point, experiencing some symptoms consistent with mania. He described himself as having a lot of energy, not needing sleep, and still having quite a bit of energy. He said he got involved into everything, was just in lots of clubs. He was developing the yearbook. He was organizing fundraisers. There was a school farm and the boarding school with cattle, and he was running the school farm. He was establishing a student government, and all at the same time he was excelling academically. And so from his report, his behavior was consistent with a manic episode. So at that point, he would have met bipolar disorder because he had experienced manic episode and depression episode.
Okay. After that, was there another episode?
Yes. The following episode would have been a depressive episode, and that was in 1981. At that point, he was a sophomore in college, and he had very low energy, very low mood, was oversleeping.
Let's see. Write down, is it a notepad? I mean, I can't read my, it has to be a written form. Thank you. I didn't see anything. Get a notepad if you don't mind, give her a notepad. And if you have to borrow up somebody behind, you're going to have one. Please. Thank you. Let me do it this way. Lawyer's approach, let me just do it. Oh, we're back on the record. Communication is essentially, is it possible to adjust so display can be read? If it's possible, if you can put it in focus so that it can be read by the jurors, if you wish.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay, Dr. Flores, you were talking about 1981 in college.
Right, and the behavior that he reported, the symptoms that he reported were consistent with the depressive episode. He was oversleeping, his mood was extremely low, his energy was extremely low, he was not interested in his schoolwork and academia at all. He said he had difficulty focusing, he was having trouble sort of staying focused in classes, and he actually said that at that point he wanted to die, and that was a time in which he re-experienced that the shack demon came back to him back in 1981, and it told him, you're a failure, you're on your own. During that period of time, academically, he had some problems that he had not had before. So there was some issues in terms of his academic performance, and then it appears that the depressive episode extended past the academic quarter or semester and into that summer.
Okay. And did you have a chance to review his Georgia Tech transcript?
Yes, I did.
That has previously been admitted as Defendant's Exhibit 3. Your Honor, I would like to
you may.
put it up. This is going to be difficult to read as a whole, but did you have a chance to review his transcript?
I did.
And was there one semester that stood out from all of the others?
Correct. He had made the dean's honor list every semester except the semester that he reported experiencing depression, in which he obtained a 2.76 grade point average.
And at that time, was Georgia Tech on a semester system?
I believe they were on a quarter system.
Or quarter system, I'm sorry. So there were 4 quarters of grades for each year?
Correct.
And he attended for a total of 12 quarters?
That sounds about right.
And was that the only quarter that he was not on the dean's list?
That is the only quarter that he was not on the dean's list.
And was that the only quarter that he had below a 3.0?
Yes, it is.
After 1981, was there another episode?
Yes. Then the following year, he experiences symptoms that are consistent with the Manic episode in 1982. At that point, he was a junior in college. He described himself as having just excessive energy, very little need for sleep. He developed a Jewish group. He was involved in lots of activities with Emory University. He took over some charity causes for the fraternity. And he excelled academically. Even doing all this stuff, he was able to excel academically. He said he had lots of energy.
Okay. Let me go back to 1981 just real briefly. During that time, was he, during that episode, was he able to take part with the fraternity and active with outside groups beyond school?
No, he was isolating, sleeping a lot, and just tending to stay by himself for the period of time in which he described symptoms consistent with depression.
And then you mentioned it continued into the following summer. How did the symptoms show up that summer?
He went home, and it appeared that he was continued with some of the same symptoms, very little energy, very low mood, not really being interested in anything. He had just obtained a brand new, I don't remember if it was a Mustang, but some sort of really nice sports car, and he had no interest in it whatsoever. Family members would visit him to say hello, because this was, I believe, in Puerto Rico, and he just had no interest. He just wanted to continue isolating.
Moving forward, was there another episode after that?
Yes. Then in 1993, at this point, he was an engineer, and he was living in Israel and working in Israel. And he described a period of time in which he had, again, lots and lots of energy, as consistent with mania, lots and lots of energy. He would sleep 4 hours and do very well at school, at work. He was working full time. He described himself as highly irritable. And he somehow decided that he was going to, he said, to become a money expert at money marketing, and so undertook that, and he made some impulsive investments, and that was in 1993.
Moving forward, and at that point, was he married yet?
I don't believe he was married at that point.
Okay. Moving forward to, was there another episode after that?
Yes. 5 years later, 1998, he's still living in Israel. By this point, he is married. He describes having, once again, excessive energy, being able to function at full capacity with 2 to 3 hours of sleep at night, very irritable. He was involved at work in 4 or 5 projects, and he said that was not the typical level of responsibility that he usually had. He was also finishing at this point his master's in business administration, so he was also attending school. He developed during this period of time this idea to move to the United States, and at the time he was actually engaged in a project that he had developed that he was really excited about. It was his baby, he said, and he just decided to just leave it and take off for the United States. And so he put his house up for, let me see if this is the one. I want to make sure that I'm in the right one. Yes, so he put up his house for sale. I think they were living in an apartment complex, but it was like a house. And he put it up for sale, sold it within 2 weeks, brought the money to Florida, to Boca Raton, and while there, he actually had no job, had his children in private school, ended up spending all the money. I think it was about $100,000, ended up spending all the money from the sale of his house. And they were there for about a year. He said to me that he had no idea why he went. The family experienced financial difficulties. He also had the thought of maybe becoming a pilot. Didn't pursue it, but that thought did come during that period of time.
And during that year that he was in Florida, did he ever work in his field?
No, he was unemployed that whole year, I believe.
And would that episode qualify as a manic episode?
It would. I mean, there are multiple symptoms there of what would be consistent with mania, all the way down to the engaging in a risky decision and being impulsive and following through with it.
Okay. What was the next incident after that?
That would have been in 2005. At that point, he's still in Israel, and he's working, and he's married, and he experiences another manic episode. He said he felt like he was on top of the world. He said, I could do anything. He said his activity level was quote unquote off the wall, very highly irritable. He had just gotten a big promotion, and his job in Israel was earning fairly a decent income, and he decided that he was going to leave it, and he left it for a position at General Electric here in Atlanta. He didn't know what position he was going to have. He didn't know how much money he was going to make. It ended up being a position in which he was making less money than what he was making in Israel.
Was there another incident after that?
Yes. Then the next manic episode is about three to 4 years later. It's kind of an overlap, 2008, 2009. At this point, he's here in Atlanta. He's working at General Electric as an engineer. He describes himself as having excessive energy. Again, very little sleep, 3 to 4 hours of sleep, and he's functioning fine. He's very irritable. He described himself as I was a terror, is what he said during that period of time. He described himself as going 100 miles. He said, I could do anything, is what he told me during that period of time. He was working at that period of time, what he said was the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs rolled into one, and doing them well. He was able to resolve in that period of time a $65 million work project. I think it was some sort of financial deficit that the company was having, and he was able to resolve it. Overspending at home. He was also day trading, engaging in day trading and lots of transactions, and he actually bought and sold about $9 million worth of in day trading. And he told me that he was not a gambler, but that during this period of time he loved the thrill of the day trading pieces, which again is consistent with mania. In terms of overspending, he was spending money on things he said that he didn't need. For example, I think it was his air conditioning unit or his furnace, one of those two, was working just fine. It was just a little old, but it was working fine. And he said, oh, let's get another one. And so he went out and got one. Got his wife a $10,000 engagement ring. I never gave you an engagement ring, so here's a ring. Started a small landscaping, something that was going to be a small landscaping thing that he was going to do at home. It ended up turning into a $35,000 landscaping. During this period of time, he had cashed in some of his, I think it was some of his retirement, and it was about $100,000 that he had cashed in. And he went through the $100,000 in that period of time, and he was about $70,000 in debt beyond it at the end of that period of mania.
You mentioned the day trading. Had he been doing day trading before this?
He had been doing some. What he said was that before this particular episode, he would trade 1 to maybe 3 times a day, 1 to 3 times a day. During this period of time, his trading was a lot higher and bigger amounts.
And were you able to verify that from other sources?
Yes, I was. I had.
No.
Sorry.
Was there another incident after that?
Yes. The next one would have been.
Did anything happen in 2010?
Yes, of course. Yes, 2010. The next episode was actually a depressive episode, and this was around February of 2010. He described symptoms that are consistent with a depressive episode. He felt very low energy, wanted to just sleep the day away, very low mood, very tired. He talked about, at the time, there were some difficulties that he was having at home, difficulties that he was having financially, and difficulties that he was having at work that were also contributing to his depression. And in 2010, there was an episode in which he re-experienced that demon reoccurring.
Okay. And was there ever a point where he was suicidal in 2010?
There was. He During that period of time, he was driving, I think it was to Greenville, and during a drive is when the demon appeared and told him, you see, you're on your own, you're a failure, is what the voice told him. Come to me, I won't ever abandon you. And what he did is he was driving and he thought about hitting the concrete barrier in an attempt to commit suicide. He thought about just dying and joining the demon. And he didn't, because he thought about his children and what his death might do to his children. And so for that reason, he did not actually. So he just continued.
Did he actually take any steps towards the act before he stopped?
He did. He actually had just passed, I think, a barrier. And so what he did is he drove forward a little bit, returned with the intent of hitting the barrier.
Okay. And were you able to verify that from any other sources?
Yes, I was.
Now, was there a point after that where he met Andrea Snyderman?
Yes.
And did he discuss that with you?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And did he discuss trips that they took together?
Yes, he did.
And is there a chart that you helped to prepare that lays that timeline out?
There's a chart that, yes, that has been prepared.
Your Honor, I would ask to use that chart. It is for demonstrative purposes only.
For the purpose of what the difference is going to be, I understand it's for the demonstrative purposes, this sort of contract.
27.
Number 27, all right. D27, you may continue. Any objection to 27?
Not for demonstrative purposes, Your Honor.
D27 is admitted for demonstrative purposes, represented to the jury if you wish.
Now, in 2010, did he tell you when he first met Andrea Snyderman?
I believe it was in March that he may have interviewed her. I'm not positive, but he certainly did not meet her. They didn't see each other more consistently until she came to work at General Electric. But I think he may have met her either March, possibly April.
And when did she actually start working at General Electric?
She started working on April 12th of 2010.
And at some point, did they start taking trips together?
Yes, they did.
Did he tell you why they were traveling together?
They were business trips.
And when was their first business trip?
Their first trip would have been that May. They went to Melbourne, Florida.
Now, was there anything particularly personal or unusual about their relationship at that point?
Not at that point, there wasn't. It was platonic supervisor-employee.
Is there something that happened in early June that, as he was coming off this depression, that affected his mental state?
I believe there was.
Can you tell us what that was?
Nilly passed away, and Nilly was the person that he considered his mom figure when he was in Israel, and she passed away, and he flew to her funeral to Israel.
And Your Honor, I'm going to offer into evidence what I have marked as Defendant's Exhibit 6. It's one of the emails that are in the email books. May I...
Any objection to that? I'm sorry, B6?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
May I present?
You may present B6. Submit a file objection.
Was there an email that set out the date of when he had to travel to Israel for that when she passed away?
Yes, he sent an email to GE employees letting him know that he had had a death in the family and was going to be flying to Israel that same night. And I don't recall the exact date, but it is on the email.
Can you see it on
No.
your screen?
No, I can't.
Under subject line?
I don't see subject. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Time off, June 7th through the 13th.
Now, why was that event important?
What Mr. Neuman told me was that when Nilly passed away, that he didn't really know what to make of it because she was his mom, but she wasn't his mom. And so that was a very significant death. And he said that death was just, it destroyed him. It was extremely difficult for him, is what he said.
After that event, did he go on another trip with Andrea Snyderman?
He did. After that, I think he said it was sort of more toward the end of June. June 30th. He took a trip with Andrea Snyderman to Norfolk, Virginia. It was also a business trip.
And was the nature of their relationship in that trip starting to change?
It was very different. He said that during that trip he shared with Ms. Snyderman information about his childhood and about his time in Israel that he had never even shared with his wife, that he shared it with emotion, that before when he shared his experience that he said was traumatic, when he had shared it with his wife, it had been just kind of matter of fact, and he said this is the first time that he'd actually talked about it with anybody with real emotion. And he said that once the emotion was out, that he didn't know how to put it back in.
Now, at that point, is there any kind of sexual or romantic relationship, or what is the status of their relationship?
At that point, it still is platonic. There is no sexual contact of any type that's occurred.
Now, is there another trip that they take after that?
Yes. The following month, I think it was a couple days later, they go to Lake Tahoe, and that was a different type of trip.
Okay. Can you tell the jury how he described that evening or that their interaction?
He said that by this point, they had been having some conversations about more personal stuff. She gave him, he said, it was not a kiss. He described it more as a peck, is what she said.
I didn't hear you.
A peck, P-E-C-K, as a peck. She gave him a peck.
Heck.
A peck.
Okay, go ahead.
He gave her a peck, or she gave it to him. Sorry, and they had dinner, and he gave her a foot rub during that trip. And he said that during that trip they expressed feelings for each other.
And did he go into any detail about the dinner that night?
I can't recall specifically. I know that they had what he described sort of as an intimate dinner.
Was there, after they came back from that trip, was there an event that was important in terms of his mental health?
There is.
Can you describe that?
One evening, he and his wife, Mr. Neuman and his wife, were at dinner at, I think, a friend's house. And while there, he experienced the apparition of what he referred to as an angel, and it spoke to him. And it said to him, and I want to make sure that I get you exactly what he said. the angel said to him that Ian and Sophia Snyderman, Ms. Andrea's kids, were his children, and that he needed to tell Andrea that.
And after the angel told him that, did he take any immediate action?
He did. He contacted Andrea and told her that he was going to be, I'm trying to think if he told her at that point. I know that he'd called her, and basically he went and he joined her in Longmont.
Before he went to Longmont, that night while he was at the dinner party, did he do anything? Did he make any other phone calls?
Yes. He contacted the hotel that Ms. Snyderman was staying in Longmont, and he made multiple attempts to get the employees there to get her, I think, some flowers and a box of chocolate and to leave a note for her.
Okay. I'm going to read a stipulation that has already been admitted into evidence and then ask you about it. The stipulation states, Andrea Snyderman, while staying at the Hampton Inn in Longmont, Colorado from July 18th through the 23rd, called the front desk to request that her room be changed from one with a larger bed and to change the reservation from one person to two person. Defendant Hemy Neuman called the hotel at 303-772-2554 on July 17, 2010, and spoke with the front desk clerk. He asked the clerk to purchase flowers and chocolates with his own money, which was to be reimbursed by Mr. Neuman, and leave Ms. Snyderman a note. The clerk thought the request unusual, although the hotel staff had received unusual requests from guests in the past. Hemy Neuman called the hotel again on July 18, 2010, and made the same request of two other staff members. The staff described Mr. Neuman as persistent in his requests. The staff did not purchase the chocolates and flowers as requested. Mr. Neuman asked the staff to read a note which said, "For the sweetest and most beautiful woman in the world, peaceful sleep, knowing that you are always in my dreams." To Ms. Snyderman, one staff member did deliver a message to Ms. Snyderman from Mr. Neuman, telling her that Hemy says he loves you. Ms. Snyderman's reaction to the note, according to the hotel staff, was she responded bashfully. She blushed. She sort of looked down at the ground and looked back at me and nodded her acknowledgement of the note. Now, is that stipulation consistent with what Mr. Neuman told you about that event?
It is. It's as he described.
Okay. Now, Your Honor, if I may approach to get one of the...
So yes, ma'am, you may, I believe, Ms. Carpenter, I'm sorry, Ms. Tyndale, has put all the exhibits out.
Did you have a chance to look at the phone records that have already been admitted in this case? And I'm referring to what's marked as State's Exhibit 1A.
I looked at phone records between, which phone records? The ones of Mr. Neuman to Ms. Snyderman?
Mr. Newman's phone records from the date in question.
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And, actually, may I approach the witness?
Yes, ma'am, you may.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 5A. Can you tell the jury how many times a phone call was made from Mr. Newman's phone to the phone number, or he received a phone call from the number 303-772-2554? Did you already have a chance to look?
I'm looking at one. I can count them right now. 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe it looks like 5 times. 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 4 times for sure.
Okay. Is there another one on the very bottom line where they?
Oh yes, where they called him. Yes. So 5.
On the next page, were there 2 additional calls to that area code, but not to that exact number? So page 42, first 2 entries.
Okay, first 2 entries. Yes, there are. There's 2 more.
Okay. And are those phone calls consistent with what he told you?
Yes, that he called multiple times, made multiple attempts to get the flowers and chocolates delivered to her.
Now, you talked about actually, let me back up. Did you discuss with Hemy what caused him to fly out to Longmont?
Yes, I did. He said that once he heard the angel tell him that the children were his and that he needed to tell Andrea that he needed to do it, and that was what he went there for.
Now, can you explain the relationship between a hallucination and a delusion as it applies here?
Sure. The hallucination is the actual hearing and seeing the angel. That's a hallucination. The delusion is what came to be from that hallucination. What you tend to see with delusions is that oftentimes there is a hallucination, and the hallucination kind of plants a seed for the irrational, illogical delusion to develop. And I believe that's what happened here, that he heard this hallucination, he heard this thing telling him that the children were his, and the seed at that point was planted that the children were his, even though it was clearly impossible that the children were his. Clearly, there's no way they could have been his.
Now, you say that there's no way that they could have been his. You would agree that Hemy is an intelligent man, correct?
Yes, he is.
Does logic and intelligence have any bearing on whether he believed this impossible thing?
No, it does not. Intelligence level does not necessarily correlate with whether or not you experience a delusion and what type of delusion. What we actually see is that individuals that are more intelligent, actually their delusions end up becoming more complex, more intricate, more intertwined, more embedded, more cemented.
And when you treat a patient with a delusion, would you ever try to present logic to them or to explain to them why something is impossible?
No, you wouldn't get anywhere. A good therapist would know never to do that with somebody with delusions, because you just don't get anywhere. They're convinced that what they believe is real, and you may try to challenge them. We call it challenging. You might try to challenge them, and they're simply going to hold firm. It's that whole part about the delusions being highly resistant to change. You can try. A good therapist, a good psychologist would not try to challenge a person with delusions, because they're not going to get anywhere.
Now, you talked earlier about ideas of reference. Is that important in this time frame?
It is. With ideas of reference, it's, I alluded to it earlier about just things that might happen sort of in normal everyday life, but they're interpreted or misinterpreted, misperceived as something different through that delusional lens of the person with the delusion. And so with regard to Mr. Neuman, there were lots and lots of discussions about Andrea Snyderman's children with Andrea Snyderman. And Andrea Snyderman's his feeling that he was getting from Andrea Snyderman's communication to him about her children is that Rusty Sneiderman was not caring for the children, was not paying attention, that the children didn't want to be with Mr. Snyderman. So she was making lots of statements that through Mr. Newman's delusional lens were being interpreted as the children were not okay with Mr. Snyderman.
Okay. And at this point, when he had that hallucination and then the delusion, did they have a physical relationship?
At that point, no. At that point, they had not had any sexual intercourse, nothing like that. Mr. Neuman had had a vasectomy. He had met Andrea Snyderman that spring, and the children were, I think, 3 and 5 or so at the time. So physically, it would have been impossible for the children to have been his.
Now, you described what he saw, the hallucination, as an angel. Was that different from what he had seen in the past?
It was. He described the angel as soft, as feminine, as speaking to him in a soft voice. He described it as sort of having like a flowing robe with like more light colors, pastel. He described it as welcoming and caring, and consoling was a word that he used. And it seemed like it was very different from the way that the demon presented.
And what was his emotional reaction to the angel?
his emotional reaction was basically that he was going to do what the angel was telling him to do. He saw the angel as something that was benevolent, something that was good.
Now, as a result of this, did he ultimately go to Colorado?
He did.
Now, was this a business trip? Did GE pay for him to go to Colorado?
No. Ms. Snyderman was there on a business trip, but he was not there for business. He flew himself, and he went to see Andrea Snyderman to tell her that the children were his.
And did he tell her that he was the father of the children?
He didn't tell her specifically that she was the father of her children. What he said to her was, you could search the world over and you will never find a father for Ian and Sophia like me.
What was her response? Did she let him continue talking after that?
She did not. He said that she shut him down very quickly, didn't want to hear it, became very emotionally distant with him immediately. He said that the door for that conversation was shut.
Now, following that evening, did he tell you where he stayed?
Yes, he stayed with Andrea Snyderman. He actually asked her whether maybe she wanted him to stay somewhere else, and she said no. And so they stayed in the same room in the same bed.
Okay. Did they have intercourse?
No, that day they did not.
Was there a point after he came back from Colorado where he described meeting her husband, Rusty?
Yes, there came a point in which Andrea Snyderman told Mr. Neuman that...
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Sustain, rephrase that question.
Just talking about what he told you, so not...
Okay.
So, are you saying that just telling what he told you about what people said?
Okay. Let me see if I can do this. He said that a suggestion was made to him to...
I just don't want you to say what you've gotten from other sources, just what he told you was said.
All right. What he said is that he went to Rusty Sneiderman's house, and they were going to talk about maybe some sort of potential business venture between Mr. Rusty Sneiderman and Mr. Neuman.
And is that something you were able to verify through emails later?
Yes, I was.
The was there another trip after that?
Yes. In August, they took a business trip to Mr. Neuman and Andrea Snyderman took a business trip to Greenville, South Carolina.
And can you summarize what he said was significant about that trip?
He said that during that trip, they rented the movie Goodbye Girl. It was one of his favorites, and they watched it, I believe, on a laptop. He said that he wasn't certain whether or not they had had sex. There was some confusion in his mind about whether or not they had had sex. He didn't think they did. He remembers seeing her come out of the bathroom, and he said that she appeared like Bathsheba from the Bible. And he just described it as this sort of amazing experience between him and Andrea Snyderman.
Okay. Let's talk about the reference to Bathsheba. Is that important in some way to his diagnosis?
It is. Because as I spoke about earlier, when somebody is experiencing a manic or a hypomanic episode, one of the things that we sometimes see is some hyper-religiosity. And so this is where they sort of become overly religious, basically. And so I took note of the fact that he saw her as this sort of biblical figure when she came out of the bathroom. It was unusual.
Now, you said that he was confused about whether there was intercourse or not between them. Is that something that, was that just as to that night, or was that something in general that he was having trouble remembering?
No, he had trouble remembering, and the difficulties remembering whether or not they had actually had full sex intercourse were such that I wondered whether he had imagined the whole entire romantic relationship with Andrea Snyderman. Now, it's not the case, because there's plenty of evidence, plenty of emails that in fact there was some sort of romantic relationship between them. But the fact that he was just really confused in terms of, was it fantasy, was it real, did it happen, did it not happen, to what extent did it happen? There was a lot of confusion about that, to the point, like I said, that it raised a red flag for me, and wondering whether it's possible, and this does happen, that he could have imagined the whole entire thing, that maybe nothing happened between them, and it was all a delusion. And it ended up not being the case, because there was some relationship between them.
Okay. Now, after this trip, what was her reaction?
I object, Your Honor, to the relevance of another witness's reaction, or another person's reaction, and the hearsay basis by which this witness could have learned that.
If I understood the question, you were asking the doctor what was her reaction. Wasn't that question I heard?
It was. Let me rephrase.
Sustained.
What did he tell you her reaction was? And is it important to his diagnosis?
I object to the hearsay.
Okay. Sustained. Rephrase that question, please.
Is what he believed her reaction was important to his diagnosis?
I believe it was, yes.
And without saying from any other source, can you say what he believed her reaction was?
He felt pushed away. He received an email a few.
We're going to go through
Sorry.
emails
Okay.
later, so
He felt pushed away. That she was basically rejecting him.
And is there any significance in that pattern, as far as they're together and then she pushes him away?
Yes, that seems to be the pattern in their entire relationship. Lots of pushing and pulling between Andrea Snyderman saying, I want you, I don't want you, I want you, I don't want you.
Okay. Now, during this time frame, were there discussions about her children?
Yes, there were.
Were those important to his diagnosis?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Can you tell me about that?
The conversations that they were having, once he heard the voice and the delusion set in of the children were his, he kept seeing what he referred to as evidence, and the evidence that he was seeing, is my opinion, were actually these ideas of reference, these things that she was saying that Andrea Snyderman was saying to Mr. Neuman, that he was interpreting as having some meaning that they really didn't have. And so he got to the point from hearing these things that she would say. So, for example, she would, he said that their conversations would be about how Mr.
I object, Your Honor, to any communication of this being attributed to Andrea Snyderman. I believe that's hearsay.
All right, Sustained. I'll rephrase that question.
I think she's entitled to go into what he told her. This is not for the truth of the matter asserted. It's for what he believed and what he told her and her diagnosis.
So if you phrase the question that way, I'll let her answer that question. Rephrase that question.
In terms of what he told you he believed and how it relates to his diagnosis, can you talk about how conversations about the children were important?
Right. The conversations were important because his interpretation of the conversations about the children were such that he was perceiving that Mr. Snyderman now this is Mr. Newman's perception, was that Mr. Snyderman was really not emotionally very interested in the children, that for some reason the children were not interested in their dad, that when the mom would get home, they would go to her, but not him, that the little girl had become distraught when Mr. Snyderman had shown up to do a reading at her school. His perception was that that the children were being emotionally neglected.
Was there a birthday party that was important during this time frame?
There is. The little girl, Sophia, had a birthday party, and Mr. Neuman received, I think it was over 100 pictures of the birthday party. And what he noticed was that Mr. Snyderman was not in any of the pictures, And so his interpretation was, isn't he interested in his child? Or why is the child not interested in being with her dad in these pictures? And so again, he was interpreting it, it's one of those ideas of reference. He was interpreting it as there's something wrong there.
Was shopping in some way involved in all of this?
Yes, he took a trip one time to Houston, and I think it was to the Disney Institute in Houston, and he said that all he could think of is what toys he was going to get, what gifts he was going to get Ian and Sophia. There was another trip that he took with Andrea Snyderman at some point later on, in which he helped her pick out the toys, the gifts that she was going to bring back for the children.
Was there an issue with a nanny?
Yes. He had conversations with Andrea Snyderman advising her that maybe she should get a nanny so that after school, when Andrea Snyderman would get home, she could devote time to the children instead of cooking and cleaning. That if she had some sort of, not necessarily, I think he used the word nanny, but he was talking more like a housekeeper.
I object, Your Honor, to the witness's interpretation of what Mr. Newman said.
I'm going to say that objection.
What was his description?
His description was that Andrea Snyderman should hire somebody that could be at home, help transport the children and whatnot, and then also help with some of the light cleaning and cooking so that she and Rusty Sneiderman could spend quality time with the children.
And how did all of those events affect his mental state and what was going on with the delusion?
I believe that all of those ideas of reference that he took as evidence, just that seed that was planted when he heard that the children were his, it just continued to grow and grow and grow.
Now, is the term co-parenting important here in some way?
It is. He thought that he was, in some ways, co-parenting with Andrea Snyderman, her children. He said that Mr. Snyderman was not interested in hiring somebody to help out with the children, and what he said to me was, but Andrea and I, we were still going to do it. And so it's kind of weird because...
Objection to the characterization weird.
Sustained. All right, ladies, we've been going about an hour. And this is the assistant here. I will give you a 10-minute break. Lloyd, approach. Put it back in the box in 10 minutes. Come on, Lloyd.